Hello everyone, and thank you very much for joining Next Labs for our webinar titled Cloud Got You Stumped? Here's how you can migrate safely. My name is Tiffany and I'm happy to host this webinar. This webinar is presented visually over Adobe Connect with audio presented over the dial-in number shown on the screen. If you click the Join the Meeting link in the meeting confirmation but were unable to connect to Adobe Connect, you may also use the alternative copy and paste method by following the instructions under the troubleshooting section in the meeting invitation. If you are still unable to access Adobe Connect, please send an email to webinarsupport@nextlabs.com and we'll be happy to assist you. If you have questions during the webinar, you may send your questions to the presenter by clicking the Q&A button on your web meeting client and they'll be addressed at the end of the webinar. I am proud to introduce today's speaker, Sudhindra Kumar. Sudhindra is an engineering manager at Next Labs. He has extensive experience in designing enterprise software products and is responsible for the design and development of rights management products at Next Labs. His areas of interest include data security in the cloud, system performance, virtualization, and agile methodologies. He blogs on topics related to the cloud security and has played various roles in product R&D and technical marketing, working closely with multiple Fortune 100 customers spanning across industries. I would now like to turn the presentation over to Sudhi.
Thanks, Tiffany. Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on which part of the world you're dialing in from. Let's see what we're going to be talking about today. So we'll see some of the key data security challenges that people face when they move to the cloud. And we'll also see some of the best practices that can be followed for securing your information that resides in the cloud. And at the end, we'll have a few minutes for a Q&A session. So we'll start off on a lighter note. This is one of my favorite strips from Dilbert. But things don't have to be so bad as depicted in this Dilbert strip. So provided you have the right kind of planning, you can actually have a good and safe migration to the cloud. Let's see what are some of those options. Right? So this is based on a survey that was conducted across multiple large enterprises and small and medium businesses. So they covered around 900 respondents, and out of that 93% of the respondents said they're already using some form of the cloud. So where 63% of them said they're using just the private cloud and 88% said they use a public cloud. And if you see here, so 58% of them use a combination of public and a private cloud. And of late, we have been seeing exponential growth in the adoption of cloud services. So here's some data for you, which shows how the installed workloads have been increasing year over year. And you don't see that in just SaaS, but you also see that in platform as a service and infrastructure as a service. And this is only bound to increase as we move further. So let's see what are some of the business applications that are moving to the cloud. We already know that many applications like email or collaboration, etc., have been used in the cloud for quite some time now. But of late, people have been becoming more and more confident about doing critical stuff like security management, compliance management, enterprise resource management, etc. So these business critical applications are also being moved to the cloud of late. So this shows the confidence that people are having in the cloud services. But while more and more people want to move to the cloud for obvious reasons, there are some barriers that prevent people from adopting the cloud in an effective manner. As you can see from the survey, which was performed by KPMG, a majority of them had raised concerns about the security of the data. Things like data loss and privacy risks, what happens to my intellectual property when it resides in the cloud, etc. So these were raised by some of the respondents of this survey on as the barriers to the adoption of cloud. And while more and more projects are moving to the cloud, it is also seen that some of the projects which are moving to the cloud, some of them are coming back to the local IT. And based on a survey performed by IDG, around 45% of the respondents said that some or the other project is indeed coming back to the local IT. And if you see the main reason, it is the security concerns and the lack of appropriate skill sets, how to manage the cloud in an effective manner. And also other small factors like, okay, how do I negotiate with the cloud service provider, etc. Right? So in today's session, we'll see how some of these concerns can be addressed in an effective manner. So what are some of the key data security challenges that people face in the cloud? So here's a list. Things like, how do I protect my intellectual property from any hackers that might be prowling around the internet? How do I audit all the accesses and whatever data is being accessed, etc.? How do I audit that? How do I report it? And how do I ensure regulatory compliance when I have all the data in the cloud? And where does my data reside? Is it in a safe location? Is it in a country which can be trusted by me? Is it, if it is a multi-tenant kind of a solution, so is my data stored in the same place as that of my competitors? How safe is it? So these are some of the key challenges, right? And also, how do I protect my data while it is at rest as well as when it is moving around? So all these are some of the key data security challenges. And today we'll be seeing how these can be addressed in an effective manner. So these are some of the categories of the vulnerability incidents that were reported. So based on a study conducted by the CSA, you see that insecure interfaces and APIs and data loss and leakage led to the maximum number of vulnerability incidents. So we might be using a lot of interfaces in the cloud. For example, if you are using something like an AWS, so you might be using their command line interface for bringing up VMs on demand. Or if you're using some other interface, say a RESTful web service interface for getting data from a third-party service provider. So how secure is that interface? When you're communicating with a third-party service provider, how are you authenticating your credentials? And how is the data being transferred? Is it encrypted? How safe is it, etc.? So these are some of the major categories of the vulnerability incidents that were surveyed upon. And Verizon did an investigation of over 100,000 incidents last year, and they found that 92% of them can be categorized in just 9 basic patterns. So this is a huge number. Over 100,000 incidents were analyzed, and they found that 92% of them fall under one of these categories, and quite a few of these are very much applicable to the cloud, like things like your web application attacks, or physical or insider misuse, or crimeware, DOS attacks, cyber espionage. So a lot of these are specific to the cloud. And here we can see that based on the data, we see that over the last few years, the loss of data or the number of breaches based on physical theft of the data is coming down, which means that people no longer need physical access to your data to be able to breach your network or to breach the data, right? So with the increase of social media, maybe people are using revealing internal information or confidential information through, say, LinkedIn or through other social media sites, maybe Facebook, etc. And also the number of incidents of hacking has been increasing exponentially over the last few years. So this is the best proof that people no longer need physical access to your environment to be able to steal your data. So there have been more and more ingenious ways in which people have been figuring out how to steal critical information from you. So how ready are the enterprises for the cloud? As you can see here, this is a survey performed by RightScale, and they checked how many enterprises have the key elements of a cloud strategy defined. And out of that, majority of them, over 50%, don't have the security policies defined well for the cloud. And you can also see that compared to 2014, there's been a 1% drop in the number of enterprises which have the security policies defined for the cloud. And this continues to be a major concern because people want to move to the cloud, but they don't have the right kind of policies which can safeguard the information that resides in the cloud. So today we'll see how we can define these policies. And many companies do not have a disaster recovery policy or a business continuity plan, etc., to be able to handle any incidents in the cloud. So let's see how some of these can be addressed. So what are some of the best practices for protecting information in the cloud? The first step is to have a good data governance strategy, and then you see how you can protect your data through various means like encryption, attribute-based access control, or data masking, rights management, and encryption. And then we'll see how you can influence the data residency, how critical this particular feature is, especially when it comes to something like SaaS. And then we'll see how an incident response plan and the business continuity management, all these plans, we'll see how critical they are in safeguarding your information and in responding to any breaches. How to minimize the impact of a breach in case one happens, right? So we'll see all these factors in detail shortly. So the first step is to define a good data governance strategy. So the first step in coming up with a good data governance strategy is to be able to identify data stewards in your organization. So these people must be a cross-domain team. So you should choose these people in such a way that they have a deep understanding and in-depth knowledge of the business processes of your organization. These people should know how your organization works, what are the kind of data that is there, what are the key processes that need to be followed, etc. So you should identify these data stewards first. And the next step is to audit existing data. It might come as a surprise, but majority of the enterprises today, they do not have a good idea of what is the kind of data they have in their enterprise, right? So the first step is to identify the data and the kind of data that you have. So is it like confidential information? Is it social security data? And so on and so forth, right? So the first step is to identify and classify the data that you have in your organization. So this has to be done by performing an audit of all the key critical information that you have in your environment and classify them accordingly, right? So the next step is to classify the information. So you need to classify the data based on the type of information. Is it some payment card information, or is it somebody's health records, or it could be based on the jurisdiction of origin, or where does the data reside, based on your contractual constraints, etc. So these are some of the factors based on which you can classify the data in your environment. The next step is to calculate the risk involved in the different types of data, because protection of information always comes at a cost. And so you don't want to protect information. It could be something like some photos that were taken at a team outing last week. I'm sure you don't want to protect that with the highest level of encryption, right? So it doesn't make sense. So you need to see which is the critical information that needs to be protected and pay maximum attention to that kind of data, right? So you need to assess the cost of protection versus the criticality of the information. And based on that, you decide where to focus more. Once you have done that, you need to define your data governance policies. So when you're defining your policies, you need to take into account any regulatory compliance that you need to comply with. Things like PCI DSS or the Sarbanes-Oxley Act or any of these. So depending upon your organization's regulatory needs, you need to make sure that your policies that you're defining can cover these needs, right? And there are many standards available, like the ISO standards, which can be used for the regulation requirements. So to make sure that you don't reinvent the wheel, if there are standards that have been defined, try to follow those standards. So once you define the policies, it is time to enforce the policies. So you need to enforce the policies for, say, access control, etc. And you need to monitor the efficiency of the policies to make sure that they are effective and they are meeting the regulatory requirements of your organization. And you need to make sure that you work on a regular basis with the regulatory agencies to make sure that you are up to date with all the legal requirements. So the next step is classification of the information. So data classification is the identification of sensitive, structured and unstructured information that resides across applications, right? So this could be based on the model and the schema definition. So there are different classification techniques. It could be based on the metadata tagging, or the users could be labeling it explicitly as, say, confidential or public or private, etc. Or it could be derived automatically based on business associations, or it could be based on content analysis. So depending upon the kind of information present in a file, you could classify the data accordingly based on automatic rules. So there are many products out there in the market which provide automated data classification based on a set of rules that you can define. So you can choose one of them and make sure that your data classification is up to date. The next step is to define the information control policy. So these are nothing but digital renditions of a company's legal and security policies. So these could be attribute-based policies which enable dynamic evaluation. So role-based access control is kind of obsolete now because it's not really dynamic, right? So attribute-based access control is much better compared to role-based access control. And in the information control policy, you typically have these three critical elements: the environment, the identity of the user who is performing an action, and the information on which somebody is acting upon, right? So how do you define an information control policy? It is a combination of the identity, environment, and information. So the identity could be the user's identity who is receiving a file, and it could be internal or external. The environment could be things like, where is the user accessing the file or the information from? Is he accessing it from his home network, or is he in the office network? Or is he, at what time of the day is he accessing it? Is it after office hours? Is it during weekends? And is he using his personal device or a mobile device for accessing this content, and etc. So all these fall into the environment domain. The next one is the information itself. So what is the type of information, and what is the metadata for this file, and what is the kind of content that is there, right? So finally, what defines an information control policy is things like who is accessing, using or sharing what data, how is he sharing it, why is he sharing it, and with whom is he sharing it. So these are the critical pieces of an information control policy. So here's an example of an information control policy. So here in this example, you can see that the US engineers part is the identity of the user, where we are saying, okay, only US engineers should access the specifications of project S, and that too only from the US offices. So that defines the environment, and the project X specification is the information that is being acted upon. So this is an example of attribute-based policies. The next step is to see how effective the rules are, right? So you have defined the policies and enforced them. Now we are trying to see, okay, how effective are these policies? So you track the usage against existing policies and exceptions. You see how many times somebody accessed a confidential information that he was not supposed to access, right? You can see all those things, and you can also integrate this with your security information and event management systems to make sure that an event is triggered, an email is sent when somebody tried accessing some, say, company finance data, right? So you can also automate a lot of these notifications. And it's critical to monitor this to be compliant with the regulatory requirements. And you keep refining the policies based on the historical information. So you need to adapt the policies to make sure that they're staying up to date. So the best way to do this is with attribute-based access control. So as I mentioned, role-based access control is kind of obsolete these days. So the ABAC or attribute-based access control provides you much more fine-grained control over the information. And it's dynamic, which can be calculated at runtime. And there are standards like XACML, which stands for Extensible Access Control Markup Language. This is an OASIS standard. And there are many products out there, including from Next Labs, which provide standards-based access control. And the beauty of this is that the attributes might come from different sources within the organization. Some information for evaluating the rights for a particular file could come from the database, some could come from your Active Directory, some could come from a third-party cloud-based service provider. You can combine all this information and dynamically calculate the access rights of a particular information. So how do we protect the information? So the first option is encrypting data. So it's critical that you encrypt both the data at rest as well as when it is being transferred across devices. So this requires a good and well-designed key management infrastructure. Things like when is the key generated, where is it stored, how is it distributed, what are the ways of recovering a key that has been lost, and how do I destroy the key. So all these are key factors for a good encryption solution. So there are different ways of safeguarding keys. So one option is through secret sharing, where the key is shared across multiple people and all the pieces have to come together at the same time for you to be able to decrypt the information. So this is one of the options. So the other option is to use a hybrid crypto system, which combines the convenience of a public key crypto system with the efficiency of a symmetric key crypto system. So symmetric key crypto systems are very efficient, whereas the public key crypto systems are very comparatively simpler to implement. They are convenient. So hybrid crypto systems combine both these together. So the key is encrypted using a public key and crypto system, and the data itself is encrypted using a symmetric key. So there are many options available here like OpenPGP or PKCS 7 for a hybrid crypto system. And there's an upcoming technology called homomorphic encryption, which allows computations to be performed on encrypted data itself. So you don't really have to decrypt the information. So this encrypts the data in such a way that mathematical operations, for example, can be performed on top of the encrypted data itself, so that when you're passing the data to a third party, you don't have to decrypt it. So this is an upcoming technology, and there are some open source libraries also available already for this one. So keep an eye on this. This is going to be a big thing in the future. The next option is data masking, wherein you replace parts of the critical information, things like say an SSO number or social security number or say credit card number. You replace parts of the critical data with irrelevant characters. And there are many commercial products available from some of the vendors which will help you with data masking technology. So whatever we saw now was okay. Now when it comes to SaaS, so SaaS or software as a service is a different beast altogether. So that comes up with its own set of complications and complexities. So how do I protect my information in a SaaS kind of a model? So you can use the cloud service providers' internal controls. You need to understand their internal controls and ensure that they have good controls over the safety of the data. And then as we discussed, you need to make sure that the data is encrypted when it is transmitted from your CSP as well as when it is stored. The next option is to use an encryption proxy between your environment and the CSP. So this would intercept all the requests and it would encrypt all the information. The other option is to use runtime protection, something like building a plugin For example, if you're using SharePoint Online, you can build a plugin which can be used for, say, rights management or for access control, etc. at runtime. So these are some of the options that you can consider in a SaaS kind of a model. So over the last few years, we have seen that the growth of crimes has been increasing, and it's not that it is always people out there outside your organization who are trying to steal your information. We have seen that based on this information you see here, compared to 2013 and 2014, the number of offenders increased in the current employees and the former employees and the contractors. So the Snowden episode is one of the best examples of this, right? So it's not necessary that people outside your organization only are stealing your information. It could be leaked from inside as well. So it's critical that you have enterprise digital rights management to safeguard your data even within your organization. So encryption is not a silver bullet that will solve all your security concerns. So you need to use rights management to control access to your cloud data. You can try and control who can access the information. You can prevent people from printing or copy pasting, etc. based on enterprise digital rights management. So we have advanced rights management solutions which can provide protection and control on documents that are stored in the cloud. So we can even provide just browser-based access, wherein you just let people view information from the browser itself. And we also have support for mobile devices, wherein you can control what operations can be performed on a mobile device. So these are some of the key things that you need to consider when you're talking to your CSP, the cloud service providers. Make sure that you talk to them about the data residency, where your data resides, the multi-tenancy traits, data retention. So once the data expires, how do they dispose of the information? How securely do they dispose of the information, right? And then make sure that they have a good incident response plan and a business continuity management as well. So incident response plan and business continuity management are key, because if you don't have one, the cost of a breach is going to be very, very high, as you can see from this graphic. Let's see how you can have a good incident response plan and business continuity management. First, you need to understand your service provider's incident response process, and then audit and adapt your security controls regularly. Create a multifaceted response team who have the power and the technical resources for handling any security incident. Say there is a breach, so they should have the power to bring down any application and also the technical finesse for doing that. Define a protocol for disclosure to your end users and media if required, so that your end users know that some of their information has been compromised. So ensure that you have a good recovery plan. Maybe you could switch to an internal server whenever something in the cloud fails, or you move to another service provider. So these are critical in making sure that even when some incident occurs, which always happens despite all the precautions that you take, so it's important that you have a good incident response plan and business continuity management. So if you have these things, then moving to the cloud shouldn't be that much of a concern. So with that, we come to an end of the session. So here's a brief introduction about Next Labs. So we are a leading provider of policy-driven information risk management software for large enterprises. And some of our clients include GE, Raytheon, Rockwell Collins, United Technologies, etc. And we have partnerships with Siemens, Microsoft, SAP, etc. And we are active participants in OASIS standards, etc. Right? And we have solutions for dynamic authorization management to protect access to key information, and also digital rights management to protect documents. So that's a brief introduction about Next Labs. We'll now open up the session for Q&A. Let's see if there are any questions. Okay, I see a question there. So how can I ensure clean data disposal in the cloud? Okay, that's a good question. So any data has an expiry period, and there are even regulations on how data should be erased in a secure manner. So there are different ways in which you can do this. For example, you could do something like crypto shredding. So this is applicable to data that has been encrypted. So you may want to shred the keys or delete the keys so that the information itself that was encrypted becomes useless now. The other option is to overwrite storage media with new or dummy data. So this is a cheap option, but it takes time because there are like petabytes of storage that could be on the system, on the storage media, and to overwrite all of that might be a little time consuming. The other option is to do degaussing, which is the removal of the magnetic field of the storage media. But this has the downside that it may permanently damage the storage media. And the other option is to destroy the storage device itself through shredding or via melting, etc. But these are all the different options. So depending upon which option suits your organizational needs, you can choose one. Okay, so there's one more question on what are the best practices for key management in the cloud. So if the keys are not protected, then your whole solution becomes vulnerable. So your encryption solution is only as effective as the key protection itself, right? So first step is to make sure that you understand from your cloud service provider how the keys are accessed and by whom. Who are the people in the cloud service provider's organization who can access your keys? And do they have a recovery key? So that's one more thing that you need to understand. So if they have a recovery key, who has access to that? And you need to have a detailed audit trail of the creation, deletion, or modification of the keys that are used for encryption. So these are some of the key points that you need to keep in mind for key management in the cloud. Tiffany, back to you.
Thank you, Sudhi, for a great presentation. Before we end today's call, I would like to encourage all of you to reach out to me, Tiffany, to request a copy of our white paper on IP protection and automating information handling, or schedule a meeting, or schedule a demo. We'll be sending out the recording of this webinar in the next week, so please watch out for it. Again, thank you for joining us today. We hope the session has been informative for you. This concludes our Next Labs webinar. Bye-bye now.